Okay.
All right, family, welcome back to the Parent Power Hour. I am your host, William Richardson. Here with me is our esteemed guest, Miss Helen Atkinson, who's joined us in the past, but always with such um, treasure troves of a wealth of experience that she brings to all of our conversations. And Rebecca Yenaway as well. Um, just always the anchor of the ship for us and doing wonderful things behind the scenes, as well as in this parent advocacy work. Good afternoon, ladies. Welcome, welcome.
Hey,
Hi.
Hey. Okay, so we're going to connect as we always do, family, before we get into the content of our show. So given that we just had a new executive order put out this morning by our governor here in Maryland, stay-at-home executive order was put out today. What is a source of happiness that you have? This is personal source of happiness, apart from your kids, if possible. But what is something that's making you happy in this moment where it really seems difficult to find joy and happiness with all of the restrictions? So Helen, we'll start with you, our guest.
So today I finally got to go shopping, and I stood in a line for 35 minutes trying to get into Trader Joe's, and we were 6 feet apart, and they were really careful about how many people they let in the store. But standing in the sunshine and just being outside and not stuck at home was like, it was one of those things that we're going to be allowed to do because it's an essential thing. I haven't been out for 7 or 8 days, so this was my trip out, and it was lovely.
Wow, well, that's good.
Yeah,
that is good. I'm glad to hear that. Rebecca?
For me, I would say that because I'm home, I am eating pretty well. So, cooking lots of meals, nothing fancy, but just, stuff that I know is good for me. Had a really good lentil soup and rice and arugula salad, and I got my daughter to eat it all too. And so just like, okay, that's good. We're being healthy. So
That's good.
Might be a stretch, but it's a good point.
Good. Helen, what did you say? I missed that. What did you say?
how about you?
Oh, for me, it's challenging workout routines. So it's nice to be able to redevote myself to physical exercise, and I'm finding joy in challenging myself. Today I took a nice long walk with my sister to the lake, and I don't know what I'll do tomorrow. It might be, riding my bike for, I don't know, a couple miles. Today our journey was, I think it was just about 3 miles. So it was nice. So just different ways to keep myself physically involved as I'm going along. So that's my new happy spot. I just really started like last week.
Nice.
Thank you for asking. Yes. I want to salute and really keep Tyrone in our thoughts and our prayers. He's not able to join us as we all expected that he would today. So everybody just keep him in your prayers. Okay, so parent engagement, and it's so interesting how life can be. A month ago, we would not have even thought about there being a non-brick and mortar sense of parent engagement. But of course, this disease has just kind of monopolized almost all aspects of our life here, not only in this country, but of course, nearly the world over. And so we have to look at parent engagement much, much differently. And so, Helen, the first question for you is, what would an ideal school and parent engagement relationship be in this era of COVID-19? What are your thoughts on that?
So I've really been puzzling about this because, as I talk to my own children who have children, so and my neighbors who have children, and I think back on when I had 5 kids in Baltimore City schools, the there's this, it's true now, more importantly, but it was also true when they were just going to school. How much do you want the teachers how much do you want to kind of say, okay, well, that's the teacher's job, let them do it, versus what involvement you want, and how much time you have to devote to each individual child. Like, I had 5 kids in city schools at the same time, and the amount of time I had to devote to each of their experiences in school, especially when a couple of them were, maybe getting in a fight or having bigger issues, it was like minimal. So I had to kind of be dragged a little bit into really being involved. And I was busy. I had a full-time job. So there's that. And then there's, like the situation that you're in, right, that everyone's in right now of, well, you got to keep them occupied all day. Otherwise they'll drive you crazy because you're actually in their presence. So I think so to answer the question, both as a parent and a teacher, I would say that the ideal first thing is I need a relationship with someone in the school. If it's high school, then I might not have a relationship with all of my children's teachers. But as a parent, I definitely want to feel like there's someone I can talk to who knows me, who I don't have to say, they don't have to look my child's name up on their roll book to figure out who I am. I want them to know me a little bit. And as a teacher, I want to have a limited number of children that I really know who they are. And, it's like, ideally, in any school, there are enough adults that if every adult knew, say, 10 kids, there'd be a connection between home and school. And to me, that it starts with, if you're going to have a conversation about academic work, first you've got to have a relationship. And when I was a teacher, I was lucky enough to only have 14 kids in my class. So I got to know every parent. And it was tough because they were, they weren't easy relationships necessarily, but I really, really felt like I couldn't get anywhere until I had that relationship. So to me, partnership means, number one, having a relationship.
All right.
Yeah. And
Rebecca?
I would say that having COVID-19 makes whatever was happening before even more prominent. So if you had a relationship, then you're in better shape than if you didn't, because I think what we need right now are those relationships. Learning has to be by nature much more personalized because not everybody has the same access to technology. And so the experience of connecting with families is totally a part of that personalizing. And I don't feel like that's very hit or miss. And everybody has a different philosophy. Every school has a different philosophy about what that should be. And I just don't think that, I think what these times sort of ask of us is to build and in some places to build that relationship where there never has been a relationship. And it's all of it is a heavy lift. But I think that, it's even more of a necessity right now.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's a great point. If you didn't have a good or great relationship with your teacher, that is exacerbated by the situation. And I do think likewise, at least once teachers and more communication comes from the school, that could be a wonderful thing for the children and the parents who have good relationships with those teachers. You're going to feel, because this is a time where, let's face it, most of us in this moment, well, I'll speak for myself. I have felt lost, and I can imagine that, our children, our students, speaking from current educator perspective, those children came into school looking for us. We were their anchor, so to speak, and now without that, not just in terms of academically, but just the relationship means everything. It really does. And so, yeah, and as you're saying that, it kind of segues into the next question of what would it be in an ideal circumstance. Now, we have to assume, and maybe that's dangerous for me to say, but hopefully one day, between the NIH, the CDC, the federal government, our local government, and everybody following the directives of our healthcare professionals, that we'll get the pandemic prayerfully eradicated, but at least alleviated to the point where, some semblance of normalcy can, come about with movement and getting back into schools. So that being the case, Helen, once the kids are back and the teachers are back and we're back to that normal sense of how schools function, how should those relationships exist? What should it look like?
Well, I think it's kind of the same thing, actually. I think this coronavirus just exaggerates what the need is. And I know from my experience as a teacher that there are parents who were on my side from the get-go, who were grateful that I was there, and who conveyed that message to their children. And the children came in ready to accept me as their teacher. And then on the reverse side, there was one child whose parent I never ever got to see. And I tried doing home visits and I tried calling. And that parent was, actually it was a grandparent, but the grandparent was so averse to, partly I think because I was white and I am white, but I think mostly because of a really negative experience that they had had with school, and they just didn't want to hear from a teacher. And I really regret never having been able to make that connection. But I think that there's, in some ways, this current situation allows us to slow down a little bit and think. If I had this opportunity as I was teaching, I would have used hope to slow down and really try to figure out what the how to make a connection with every single parent or grandparent, so that when you would go back, you'd be starting from a different basis. And I think it's really hard, and I think it's possible that we need some training in that adults in schools, I don't think you can assume that they know how to do that. And I think this would be a great time to get some real training in uh, how to relate in, it's almost like to the not just the whole child, but the whole family. How do you
Mm.
relate to a whole family? And that means not judging the circumstances that they're in, trying to see side of what they bring to even something where you think that the child is not being well looked after, um, trying to see some positives and find a basis to have a relationship so you can have a real conversation. And I think that that's I think it's really difficult. I think teachers need support in doing that, because the tendency is to relate to the parents who are on your side. And so the question for me is, how do you relate to the parents who are really skeptical about you, skeptical about school in general? And then how do you, when we go back to regular school, how do you make that continue? How do you make that part of day-to-day life in school, including all parents?
Rebecca?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think that parents are like, my daughter's at a school where the school has not done a good job of inviting parents in. In fact, they really don't like parents to be in the space. And if they come in, they want them to make an appointment. And so there's, and they do a good job. It's a good school, you know, that it, and they, but their mentality is like, we'll do this and you do what you do. And I think it's been interesting to see like how do you build a relationship now in that context where you decided that you're the ones that are the experts at school and parents are not the experts at school, where we have to really collaborate. And I don't love being disconnected from school. I only have one kid, so I have the time and I have the interest in being in school a whole bunch and, you know, being all up in everybody's business and like, and like, I don't know, at some point in the school year, my daughter's teacher shared that she adopted her child. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, like and she's someone who I now have a relationship with because she just shared, we were having a struggle. And so we shared. And I feel like that very human interaction, that knowledge of her helped me a lot, to know how to be in that space, to know how to connect. And, you know, I still would like to be part of like the academic experience, but having that personal connection, just something about it, like, let me know how she was going to think about my kid, because her kid is also 6. And I just think about how hard it is to build those connections. And I do think that engagement starts with that kind of connection, but I also think there's a broader sense of, I think that how we define engagement is important. And I think so many schools either have no definition, or the definition that they have created is about, yes, you can come volunteer and these are your time slots, or you can come to the cafeteria, which is always a disaster, and probably, you know, hard for anybody to manage a cafeteria. Like the places that parents are placed are just not always thoughtful and great uses of various parents that want to show up and be a part of school. So I think there's like, I think even on a good day, and that's showing to not serve us well now. On a good day, schools are defining what parent engagement looks like. And if parents want to redefine what engagement looks like, that's really on them. And it's often not an amicable conversation. It's a conversation that might involve some tension and conflict and pushback. If parents see a space where actually there's something that's different that's needed, or they want to be able to offer something, but people are uncomfortable with parents in the space. And I just find that really unfortunate. And so now that we are in the space where in order for teachers to be of any help to parents, they have to build that relationship, in some cases. And then I think for others, like, parents are just totally stretched thin and don't have the resources to do anything with kids. Like we need each other differently, and just more than we used to. But I always think that parents and teachers have needed each other in the job of educating young people. Yeah, I don't. That's all I'll say.
If I can jump in, I just thought of one little story. I had the privilege of being associated with Connections, which is a school it's in West Baltimore, and there was it was the most remarkable example of parent engagement that I've ever seen. And I mean, in my own school, we had a lot of one-on-one, and that was very positive. But this was an example where what happened was, it was an arts-based school, so the kids were involved in a lot of things to do with, a lot of it was dance, but also drumming and visual arts. And there were so many parents would show up to every performance of whatever kind of performance it was. And the teachers all showed up, and the teachers would sit with the parents and build a connection around the success that the children were having on stage, or, in whatever small group that it was. And that connection meant more than any talk about, well, it was the gateway to having talks about academics. So it started by celebrating how great children would, because if you've got really good teachers teaching the arts, they can make most kids shine and have something that they're really proud of and have something that parents want to come and see. So I think it's one of those things that doesn't get talked about enough, is how you use the arts to give children avenues of success that aren't purely academic. And the same can be said of a sports program. So when kids have a way to shine, parents want to show up. And when they show up and the parents see that the teachers appreciate their children, I think that can...
Helen's cutting out a little
kind of engagement that you don't even have to work at, because it just happens. Then build from there. But if you start with a negative phone call home, and then a call for parents to come to teacher conferences, parents are understanding.
Helen, you're cutting out a little bit. William, I wonder if you would share your experience both as a parent and as a teacher.
Yeah. Well, as a teacher, I would do what I would want my children's teachers to do, which is introduce and invite. So introduce themselves to me, phone call, nowadays text, email, but I think phone call really is a good connection. Setting up parent meetings just as soon as the school year gets to going, and then invite the parent to the classroom. Invite the parent to see how your classroom functions. Invite the parent to see what your child is doing or what part that they have to play in the class. Also, invite the parent to volunteer in the class. That goes a long way, I think. Even if the parent isn't able to come and engage in the classroom, they feel wanted, they feel welcome. You have done your job in welcoming them. And I think thirdly, it would be to be consistent with that parent connection. It's what you alluded to, Helen, not just calling the parents when the child does something that's negative or when they're beginning to fail their classes or whatever the case may be. Call them about a good thing. Call them about some questions that they have. Those kind of things go a long way to show the parent not only that you're interested, but that you're trying to gain some more understanding from the parent. And I had a conversation just before we went to this current COVID era, and there's a young man who was having some behavioral issues, in school, and we had a parent teacher meeting, then we had an IEP meeting, and after the meeting was over, I let everyone else go, and I just talked to the parent for about an hour
Mm.
about her child. You know, was the child or does the child exhibit this kind of behaviors at home? You know, how long has this been happening? How aware were you? And despite what some people have said about this parent being kind of a difficult parent, she was very, very open into discussing her child and very vulnerable, actually, in discussing that her child has been difficult for her amongst other children that she has. And so, introducing yourself, being consistent, and inviting the parent is huge. And it's just something that I would want my children's teachers to do. So, um, you talked about, Rebecca, you talked about schools defining parent engagement, and you also spoke about how if parents want to redefine the engagement, that ends up falling on their shoulders. What role do you see policy or funding in some of these directives or understandings or shaping the definitions of parent engagement?
Yeah, I'm going to let Helen talk a lot about this, but I think she's well suited for this question. But I do think that there's the definition of engagement. I think we're moving towards, I think with our current, the person that's currently in charge of family and community engagement, I think there is a shift towards this idea of having engagement be a partnership, where the definition is co-created. So that it is not just defined by schools and whatever a principal is comfortable with. We have entities like school family councils where parents are supposed to have real power in decision making. They're not really activated spaces, but I think it goes beyond that. I think the academic space is also important. I think that, frankly, schools need parents to advocate. Like right now, every child in our system needs access to technology. And if our district doesn't have the funding to do that, then parents need to be outraged about that and go get the funding from the state or from the federal government. Like, we need to be fighting for our children right now, and not just sort of waiting for the district to deliver whatever it is they're going to deliver to us. That this is a time for parents to fight for what they need, for what their kids need. And I think there's so many spaces. I mean, this is a crisis, but Baltimore City schools are in crisis all the time, and we call it normal. But there's, when we had cold schools, that was a moment for fighting where it felt like a crisis, but schools have always been too cold or too hot. Like, it's been going on forever.
Yeah.
Every summer they're too hot, or towards the summer, it's like, how many days do they close early because it's over 90 degrees by noon?
Seasonal extremes, whatever it is in that season. Yes.
Exactly. And I think there's other things like, are we pleased with how much time kids spend on standardized tests, preparing for standardized tests? Are we okay with, I don't know. There's a number of other things that we could fight for that I think are really meaningful things for parents to be advocating for. So I think that's one whole piece of engagement that I don't expect a policy to necessarily give us permission to do. I think that's something that parents need to understand, that you have the power to do. And some of that stuff, like, the closer that I get to teachers, the more it's like, oh, there are things that are not working for them about their jobs. How teacher pay is tied to student test scores has some very limiting factors on the way that people teach to a test. And the more that parents understand what teachers are struggling with in terms of serving their children well, teachers can't always say, we don't like the way that we're evaluated, but parents most certainly can. So I think there's all sorts of spaces for that alliance between teachers and parents to be stronger, so that parents can have a deeper role in making the system something that actually makes sense for children in a different kind of way.
Thank you. Helen, what do you think? Funding, policy, what role do those things have to play?
So it's interesting because people have been saying for a couple of decades, if not longer, how what a difference it makes to have parents involved in schools and parents partnering in children's education. So studies have shown for decades and decades that the more parents are involved and the more parents kind of on a day-to-day basis in what their kids are doing, the better the outcomes for the kids. And it works in terms of parents understanding and setting high expectations, and then saying, kind of making sure that the school also has high expectations and appropriate expectations. So that's been true for a long time. And there have been attempts at a policy level to address this. So, for instance, No Child Left Behind put a lot of money into parent engagement. And for a while there, we had a fully funded parent engagement office.
Excuse me.
Bless you.
Thank you.
In city schools. And so there, and that was where money was tied. It wasn't just policy, it was also, there was funding for it. The problem is that when the federal government and sometimes the state government gives us money, they tie the money to certain accountability measures. So they say, okay, well, we're not just going to give them money and not look at whether it works or not. And the tendency is when they put the accountability measures in, they try to count. It's kind of like bean counting. You know, they put something that you can count. So, for instance, one of the things that has driven the definition of parent engagement in Maryland is the idea that parents have to sign off on the budget proposal that a principal submits to central office. Parents have to sign off on the school improvement plan. Parents are even supposed to sign off on a recommendation for who should be the next principal. So there are these things that are written into policy that parents have to be engaged in. And so what happens is, because it's defined that way, schools who, you know, where everyone's very busy, overstressed, has too much work to do, they resort to, well, let's just find the 5 parents that we need to sign this document. But there isn't really any solid engagement behind it. It's just, let's get 5 reliable parents who we talk to all the time, who are grateful for what we do for their kid, and they'll come in and go to a meeting and sign any document we ask them to sign. They may even have some good ideas, but the main point is that, you know, you just have to get 5 parents, say, and that's the wrong way to hold schools accountable for engagement, because it just allows the minimal effort to take place. And so what policy needs to do and what funding needs to do is get much more granular in terms of what the measures are of what real parent engagement involves. And it's, for one thing, it takes time to really turn a school around. If you've got a school that has really has a challenge with parent engagement, with a lot of parents who are angry, it really takes time, and it takes quite a lot of resources to pull that together. And I think do is recognize the amount of work that it takes to do that and the amount of support. So actually, you need a lot of training. Staff needs training and parents need training, because parents don't come into school normally set to approve a budget, even read a budget. Most parents wouldn't have a clue. Most people wouldn't have a clue how to look at a school budget and know what to do with it. So I think the problem with the policy has been there hasn't been an investment in parent training and in staff training for how to do even something as simple as calling parents and having an effective conversation with them, or on the parent end, how to advocate for your child, how to advocate effectively for your child in a school setting. And those kinds of things are where the policy needs to go, and where you'll see real change, as opposed to just saying, well, you've got to have this number of parents signing off on a document. That's a cop-out. I think there's a lot more real work that needs to happen, and it can be driven by policy and by funding.
I also think that, having being in meetings with the district, I know that they're in the Family Community Engagement Office. I know they're trying to make a shift from this very compliance-driven department to a department that does the real work of engagement. So, they would admit that their staff spent a lot of time checking to see if people were spending their Title I money, which is their federal monies that have some of them, at least some of that money is supposed to be spent on parent engagement, making sure that they spent it well. Or looking at their binders for their school family council to make sure that they had the right number of meetings and signatures. And so they're trying to make that shift. But that's a process, even just within the Office of Family Community Engagement. And I think that, there's real work to be done, like the training of parents. Like, we could be helping parents to form PTOs and PTAs and school family councils. And I mean, that's some of the work that Teachers Democracy Project has begun doing with parents. And some of it is just, that there's just been no support around those parent groups. And I think, having community schools, there's an opportunity there. But those folks also need to be trained in how do you organize a group of parents? How do you support them? And really shifting it from this idea of schools are leading these parent spaces to what does it look like for parents to actually lead their own spaces, to come up with their own agenda for things that they care about in their school. I mean, one thing that we hear about over and over again is that parents are concerned with issues of school safety or bullying or issues of school culture, and just wanting to feel, and this spans from schools that I would call privileged to schools that are not privileged, that schools really, parents want to see schools be safe spaces for children. And that's all about relationships, and that's about parent relationships, that's about teacher to student relationships, that's about admin to teacher relationships, that's relationships all over the place. And parents have a role to play in that. And as our district moves to having more restorative practices schools, I think we have to bring parents into that framework, so that they can be continuing that work at home. I think I might have gone on a tangent there, but those are all the spaces that I think, that's right. I started with the district and what they could be doing around family engagement. I mean, I think I don't even know if the Family Community Engagement Office is trained in restorative practices. And just from my visits to schools, conflict is a part of what's happening around parent relationships.
Yep.
And you don't have a space where you understand how to work restoratively with parents and with community. That's a problem. I mean, it's a problem with children, and it's, if we're going to look holistically, we've got to also approach families in that space too.
I would say that, and also, barring the district, let's say the district never moves ever. I think it falls on the principals to push the teachers, and you could do it through RP. If you can't think of a way to do it, you can certainly use restorative practices, circle and community, even town hall type events to get parents involved and feeling like a part of the school community. So I think if the district never says another thing, the school itself, led by the principal, the school leaders, and it should trickle down, of course, to the teachers. And those teachers that have, um, more of a propensity to do that can be leaders of their peers, in that front. But that has to happen. This has to happen. And you know, this crisis is to me bringing a lot of things to light. You know, how much more connected would we have been if our parent engagement, parent teacher, parent school leader and teacher, and if we were more of each school was more of a community when this happened.
Yeah.
There would be a rallying point. There would be a focal point to rally around. But in some cases we do have this, but not in all cases. And I'm glad you pointed that out, Rebecca, that, rather it's a school that has privilege or underprivileged and underserved school, Helen, kind of like what we were talking about just before we went live, is that, these things, they go past those boundaries. It's where people find themselves, I think. And I always put a school leader, to initiate the process, to initiate the engagement, to put money in the budget, to set aside money, I should say, for parent-teacher events, parent-student events, things where we can come together over. It could be seemingly silly team-building events. They don't have to be fancy. When you're doing a project or you're engaged in something with someone, a lot of times you end up knowing them better. And that's not a far cry for schools to do. Family, a barbecue, any of those kind of events that can be, they can be put on once a month to bring the school body and the parent body together.
My son, who's a Baltimore City teacher, oh no, actually, this was my husband said this. He used to be a Baltimore City teacher. He said that if nothing else came from this, other than we had an accurate phone number for every single family in Baltimore City, of all of our kids, that would be that would be fantastic, because and not an active phone number and a conversation.
No, you're absolutely right. And I've seen that firsthand where, you're trying to contact the parent, and I call it the call sheet when I ask, one of the front office managers for a call sheet for a student, and you go through 6 or 7 numbers.
Because they change all the time, which means that we're not staying on top of our students' lives, because if we can't reach a parent, then there's a disconnect there. There should be a constant line of connection.
Yeah, I agree. I do agree. Rebecca, anything to add?
No, I think there's, I think sometimes when we think about what do we want for parent engagement, I think there is a tendency to go towards, how we do our events, how we do our back to school nights, how we bring people in. And though I think those things are good, I think at the end of that kind of strategy, it's still from the school. It's still guided by the school. And I feel like there's like a step 0, which is we need to first have a conversation with parents that's like, how do you want to be here? And everybody loves a good barbecue, everybody loves a good event, and it makes people feel welcome. And that's good. It's like but it's still a very traditional approach to thinking about engagement. And I think we have to have like a deeper conversation about what are your values? What are the things that you prioritize for your child's education? What do you want to have happen in school? Like that, if we're not having the conversation about where our shared values are, then it's really hard to have the conversation about what strategies need to take place. Like I feel like, and that it does require a step back from just like, pulling off a welcoming space is super important. And most people will be really happy with that. But I think there's this idea of transformational parent engagement, and it's a kind of school of thought around engagement that's different than this traditional model. And it really is about sharing a set of values in order to come up with a set of strategies that make sense.
Right.
Is
And I want to clarify, I didn't mean that to be,
yeah.
The only form of engagement, but at least let's reach out, invite some people over to our community, our house, our home, the place where we take care of these most precious of beings for, throughout the day. And then, I would definitely say you build upon that. What's next? What things do we need to talk about? What things does the school need to know about us? Or the parents need to know about us as a school? And what things do we need to know about them as parents and their children? And certainly furthering strategies of engagement.
And
Final thoughts?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I want to say one more thing. I think like that also when we invite parents in, that I often hear people say, well, they don't show up. And I think that there's something to push on there. We have to also understand the historic relationship that parents have with schools, and to know that if we're going to have that deeper conversation about values, that it's going to take sustained asking and sustained relationship building for people to be able to come to the table and know that they're going to be listened to, and that it's going to be a genuine conversation. And that is the culture shift that I think that needs to kind of happen in order for the conversations to be meaningful. So I just want to throw that out there, that I think that somebody, Karen Mapp is somebody who the district brought in to sort of start training some of people internally about parent engagement. And she called it generational mistrust or something like that, that there's a legacy that many parents bring with them. And sometimes it's not that, it could just be in the time that your child has been at the school of not feeling like your voice is listened to. And so we have some work to do to create a really authentic space of partnership.
Final thoughts, Helen?
I would just say for any parents out there listening that you should be so proud of how you're coping, everything that you're doing to make your kids happy. And even if you lose it sometimes, that this is such a difficult time. And if you are not managing to keep them learning 6 hours a day, then give yourself a break, because it doesn't usually happen in school either. So just give yourself a break.
Rebecca, final thoughts? Or had you said it last time?
No, I think that.
All right. Well, ladies, thank you for making this podcast today what it is. Helen, thank you.
Yep.
As always. Join us next time, family. Thank you for tuning in. Helen, that's a great parting shot. Give yourselves a big hug, parents, because you've been forced to be in a situation that you probably have not been in since your children were very, very, very young. And so relax, breathe, incorporate things that you are an expert in, and show those kids about life and how you navigate life. That too is a great lesson.
Yep.
Until next time, family, tune in next Monday, and unless Rebecca sends you all a message via our Facebook page. But until then, we hope to see you again. Take good care of yourselves. Follow all the directives. Hug your loved ones. People are doing what I call long loss. call people, do chats. I see family chats all over. Talk to some people who you haven't talked to in a while. And see you next time.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks,
Welcome. Thank you.
William.